So we have finally worked our way down to the turtle. Now, this turtle is the last object that I'm going to be narrating on. The last object, which will be the valve that I'm going to be working on, I don't think I'm actually going to give any kind of narration to it just because it really is absolutely no different than any of the previous objects that I've worked on. Um, I'm really not going to be using any new tools. Everything that I've done previously, I mean, I've used pretty much every single one of these tools. I don't think I've used project from view, but that's fairly simple. All you really do is you just select this project from view, and you get your result. You get your UV map. Now this is useful for doing things like just projecting from your camera for matte paintings and stuff like that. So that's when you want to get some distortion into your UV map. Because if you're using a wide angle lens, that's what it's useful for. I don't think I've used fit UVs, a mirror. I mean, like a lot of these are really self-explanatory. Select UVs, edit UVs. It's just cut, da 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 da. I didn't really need all this because I can just use, these functions here: cut, copy, paste. So Control X, Control C, and Control V. That is what I generally use for that. And then UV symmetry. I don't really like UV symmetry, to be honest, because it's along this axis right here. I never end up placing my UVs perfectly along this line and editing my UV symmetrically. What I'd rather do is I would honestly rather just delete a part of the model, mirror it over, and work that way, because at least that way I know that one side is going to be perfectly symmetrical with the other. Often Modo symmetry tools break, so I'm just not, honestly, I just don't bother with the hassle. Anyways, so for this object, I don't think I'm going to actually have any narration. It's just going to be more or less a time lapse, or not even a time lapse, but just another deeper example of unwrapping another object. So this is the last narrating that I will be doing on this object right here. So much like the previous objects, what I want to do is I want to break this guy down into smaller pieces. So first of all, I'm going to select this entire object. I'm going to move him down here because I will be splitting him up into smaller pieces that I can work and just really simplify my job for myself. Because if I was going to work like a lot of other people do, where I make my selection around for example the neck, like that, more or less. Right, and let's just say I was going to cut this head. I was going to select all these polygons here, and I was then going to do something like this, and cut the head this way and that way. Right, and then I'd obviously have to pick the inside of the mouth, and that might become a little bit challenging, and that some edges might be overlapping with another object altogether. And then I'm going to have to select all these edges around, and then all these edges, and then those and that. Eventually picking all these edges might become slightly frustrating. So what I'd rather honestly do is I would just rather pick my fights separately. So what I'm going to do, and the other nice thing, of course, is, for example, if I finish one arm, I can easily mirror it over and just get my results really fast like that. So I'm just going to pick and choose these objects, just going to paste them on a separate layer, go back to this object here, like that. I'm going to separate the legs all together onto a different object. Same thing with the nails. Again, they're going separate. Eyes, Once again, separate object, tongue, nice and alone. And now what I can do is I can of course pick my object here, like that. And if it's not a perfect selection, just, you know, refine it. And now grow it by pressing shift and up, click, click, click. You know, I get my arm. I'm going to cut that arm out. Like that. Again, shift and up, up, up. Got that. In fact, I could actually delete that arm. I don't need it because I'm going to be UVing only one arm, mirroring it over. Now for the head, I'm going to go to the side view. I'm going to make sure I select everything I need. Once again, grow my selection to whatever I need. Cut that object out. I'm going to create a few new open layers for me to just start pasting stuff into. And that's okay. This isn't too bad. So now let's analyze these objects. For this arm, for example, the closest thing that I could really think of is, you know, I could almost look at this object from a plane here and from a plane here. They're very flat across both these sides here and there. So what I want to do is I'm going to actually make a cut right along this arm like that, and from the bottom, and I'm going to get two separate sides to this arm UV'd. So I'm just going to select that. I don't know if I'm going to get the perfect cut just yet, and probably not, so I'm just going to select the one beside it. And then of course I'm just going to have to select all these as well. And like that, I've made my cut all the way across this object, separating the front from the back. I'm going to now press the unwrap tool, and I get this part of the object unwrapped. I'm going to now check or do a UV test. And of course I have too many texture maps, so I'm just going to delete that. And I really probably shouldn't have deleted all of them. So what I want to do is I want to delete these two. I don't need them. Rename this one to map 1. The reason why I want to rename it to map 1 is because that's what the UV test material was set to. It was set to link to all the objects with UV map 1. I'm just going to rotate this slightly like that. And this isn't bad. I actually quite like that. Now, the one thing I could do, of course, is for this object is if I see any part of the model that I could kind of link to, you know, that I could see that I could, you know, weld, well then, you know, I'll absolutely do it. So in this case, I'm just going to try to look for areas that I can actually link to. Of course, you know, you start seeing that I'm quite off by 1 square. So this I could definitely do. Of course, my arm might be slightly bigger from one side than the other. So I'm just going to slightly scale it down, make sure it all works. And now I'm just going to go back and sew like that. And of course, I am going to now just use the relax function. And, you know, now at the very least, I have this section sewn. And of course, this section not so much. Now, what I could have done for this model, really, is I could have used the bend function. So I'm just going to unsew that. And if I choose this object here, and I go back to my model pane, I go to deform, I can use the bend tool, and wherever I choose from, in this case I want to deform it from here, except of course I want to deform it the other way. What I could start to do is I could start to unbend this object like that. Of course, I would have to do the same thing for the other side of the arm. Like that. And of course, I would have to choose bend. Now, because this part is selected, I am only affecting that part of the model, which is perfectly fine. And every single time you decide that you're finished with bend, you make sure you have to drop the tool and drop it and pick it up again. Of course, the reason for that is because, you just have to. So you might have to stretch that slightly. Edit the UVs. You're not going to get a perfect result right away. That's perfectly fine. And that's kind of what you're going to get right there. And you know what? What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to make sure that I choose a bigger radius. I'm going to line some of this back up. Because you have to remember that what I'm actually after is I'm going to be using relax after this anyways. So even though my result isn't perfect right now, it's not necessarily going to be perfectly fixed later, but the result will be quite okay. So I'm just going to start hitting the up arrow up until I reach the very end, or at least as close to it as possible. Of course, I'm going to click the sew button now. And if you have sometimes a hard time doing that, just remember, go to move and sew with options, or with options, and then go to sew average. And you've sewn that part of the model. Now very simply just hit relax, and you get a result like that, which is perfectly acceptable, good enough. It's not perfect, it's not literally perfect all the way around, but it's it's nice not to have that seam visible. Of course, I could just straighten some of this out, and sometimes you might have to do it without the subdivision showing, just to see more clearly what it is that you're going after. Once again, hit relax, see what you get, and that's fine. So now I'm just going to mirror that over. And of course, this part of the model is subdivided, so I'm just going to have to go in there, unsubdivide it, move it over. Once again, try to bring it a little bit closer in. Once you're done that, move it out of the way in the UV viewport. Make sure you scale it negatively, and now all of a sudden my both arms are done. I can now move them out of the way because I will be once again just packing them up very simply later on. This part of the object is a piece of cake. I'm just literally just going to cut right along the side here. You might want to cut a little bit further down, but I think this will do. Just gonna make a few cuts all the way across this object. And then what I'm going to do is, once the cuts are made, not like that, not like that either. Okay. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to press unwrap. I'm going to test this UV map. Of course, the axis on which it's showing right now, it's rotated from the wrong view. I don't care for that, so I'm just going to rotate it the other way. And that's perfectly fine. I'm going to look at the back of the shell. Same thing. Don't care what I see here. Might have to rotate it the other way around. And this object works for me. This one was super simple. So far I have this. I have the arms done. And of course, I think I must have moved something, because my arms are off. Or at least one of them is. I think I didn't select one arm in particular, and I moved both them over because remember, when something is not selected, everything on that layer is selected. So I'm just going to bring those two objects together like that. I'm going to sew it together, and now I can move on to the next part.